Binge drinking can certainly be a problem for college kids, but for grandma and grandpa? According to a new study from the Journal of the American Geriatric Society, elderly drinking is on the rise. And in the study, 1 in 10 older Americans binge drink. And binge drinking, various definitions, but in general thought to be 5+ drinks for men, 4+ drinks for women. And 70% of all hospitalized older folks and up to 50% of nursing home residents have alcohol-related problems.
Well, look at Grandma. She's putting away a 6-pack plus. I mean...
Well, but you hit the nail on the head, Dr. Ordon, because the way your body metabolizes alcohol changes as you get older. You're not as efficient. So if this person in their 70s has 2 or 3 beers, it's going to be the equivalent of 7 to 8 beers that a 20-year-old might drink. So you can understand the effects. You could literally drink 2 beers and depending upon your physiology.
Your body thinks you drank that many beers.
Well, I mean, the fact is that as we age, our metabolism, alcohol is metabolized in the liver. Our livers slow down. Those enzymes that are specifically there to break down alcohol just don't work as quickly. So you're going to get higher levels that are going to last longer.
And there's also something else that changes physiologically as you get older. Even your thirst mechanism is blunted. And what that can mean is you may be more likely to be dehydrated. And so let's put all these scenarios together where you're elderly and you're a little bit dehydrated. Your physiology is different in terms of metabolizing alcohol, and you have a couple of drinks. You know, maybe 2 to 3 drinks is almost the new binge drinking in someone who's older. So then you give someone 5, 6, 7 drinks, and that's the equivalent of 15, 16, 20. You can see how that's a problem. You can see how that can lead to so many falls, visits to the hospital. So I think this is just one to think about, because you may have to approach someone you love and say, well, hey, you know, grandma, grandpa, maybe we need to pull back a little bit on the alcohol intake.
But
it's a tough conversation to have.
It's a very tough conversation to have, but you want to be mindful of how you do it, because they can become very defensive. You know, if you just say, hey, you drink too much. But like you said, if you kind of approach it in a sensitive way.
We always talk on this show about how something can be pleasant. Alcohol, you know, if you have a drink or 2 and you can metabolize it effectively, that can be a very normal part of the aging process. You can handle it well. But I do think that we probably, heck, it even probably happens in the ER. If I see someone who's in their 80s and they're in for a fall and fractured their hip, I'll openly admit my first thought isn't, oh, they were drinking. But I think this study highlights that we should all be asking that question a little bit more, just to make sure, because this falls in the elderly are such a problem. And you can be perfectly healthy. You can fall and break your hip,
go downhill.
and you go downhill from there, and you never recover. And that's one of the reasons we're talking about
And
this.
we find the elderly are driving later and later. I mean, my aunt is 90 years old. She's still driving and doing well.
Yeah, and
which is great.
Which is great, but I honestly, I'm not that surprised. I'm glad we're having the conversation, because it's an important conversation. But just overall, I sincerely feel that elderly people are a lot more adventurous than we think they are. Like, we talk about sexually transmitted infections being at an all-time high, and we are talking about them binge drinking now. Like, grandma isn't sitting at home and knitting.
No,
when
she
you
wants to have.
think she is.
She wants to have fun. She wants to be
and
sociable.
that's why we also have to be careful, right, not to judge, because, hey, she's allowed to enjoy her life.
She is allowed to enjoy her life, but we also, they're clapping.
Well, yeah.
She is, but we just want people to be careful. Like, when we talk about binge drinking, sometimes an elderly person may be on medication, and maybe the alcohol won't mix with the medication, or alcoholism can, you know, make certain conditions worse, like high blood pressure or diabetes, or it could lead to someone having pancreatitis or gastritis and things like that. So you just want to be mindful of that and let grandma have fun, but grandma, don't do that. Grandma, that's too much. It's too much.
I think the takeaway here is, whether you're 20 or 80, alcohol abuse and binge drinking, obviously not healthy, but just be aware of the physiology as you get older. Your ability to process alcohol does decrease. And certainly if someone you love, you think they may have a problem, we're gonna have a list of resources on our website